Hello, it's Aaron. Welcome back to the show. My guest today is Matthew Peterson, who is the editor in chief of The Blaze. He's also the founding editor of The American Mind, VP of Education at Claremont, has done a lot of interesting things, has a PhD, so he has the academic background as well. And you can find a link to The Blaze in the show notes. Matt, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I want to talk today about the future of conservative media, just the media landscape in general. But first, can you tell people who maybe not be familiar, what is The Blaze?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting story, and it relates to a lot of what we see going on in the landscape right now, because The Blaze is really founded by its origin story is Glenn Beck leaving Fox, similar to the way in which Tucker Carlson left Fox not that long ago. So Glenn at the time was the populist of the era, right? And this is going back to Tea Party, Occupy, like that sort of era. And Fox, of course, cable was dominant. Roger Ailes was the genius of TV on the right, telling Richard Nixon that he wouldn't win unless he reconciled himself to winning on TV. And then also creating Fox, which no one thought was possible, right? No one thought, we forget this now, but no one thought you could have another network besides the big three and PBS that was actually off the grid, right, in terms of ideology. And Fox News, of course, became very successful. Glenn Beck was an incredibly successful radio guy who was very successful on Fox and primetime, basically. And he and Roger Ailes had a falling out. He had a falling out with the network, and he left. And when he left, being the kind of visionary that he is, very, very fascinating figure and a great guy, which is rare for people in that position who've made that who've had that kind of success in media. Glenn decided right away that he was going to create TV on the internet. And suffice it to say, this wasn't taken seriously at Fox, which is why Fox Nation still kind of sucks in documentaries, and that's about it. They're sort of behind. They put themselves behind when it came to digital. So the genius of Glenn Beck is that he was correct that the future was moving TV and news to the internet, to digital. And so he did that from the outset. Now, the story since then has been had a lot of ups and downs. So the idea was, sort of a network of free speech for all kinds of views, generally, of course, right-leaning. And we put them all, in this digital space with high production value. And early on, I think he had a lot of hires and people that he probably, regrets now. And they did, it's no secret, burn through a lot of money, but ultimately came out at the end successful. And Blaze Media now is always a top 5 by any measure right-leaning media entity that's digitally based and is profitable.
Wow. And so it's theblaze.com, right? You have kind of a website with like traditional web content, but also I think the heart of it is the multimedia, the audio-visual content with a lot of very big name people on the network there.
Yeah, so I think we're evolving now into a new phase of Blaze Media. It's very exciting, and that's why I'm here. That's why I chose to come here, because I think something amazing is happening here, and it's well positioned to do things that no one else is doing. But right now, you have an incredible lineup of people. So you have Glenn Beck, you have Jason Whitlock, who comes from the sports world and is a very interesting guy. He wasn't really that into politics until fairly recently. And he talks about sports, he talks about politics, he talks about faith. I have Steve Deace, who's from the Midwest, big radio guy, knows the state of Iowa very, very well. And, he was saying some really interesting things when I first came on, and still is like moving forward, always moving forward. Ali Bastucki is one of the few female commentators in the United States who is as faith-filled and conservative, I think, quote unquote, more than anyone else. And she actually reaches the housewives of America. I mean, her audience is actually, people who are in that demographic. It's not just people listening to social commentary. Very powerful show that she has, and she's been very strong against DEI and BLM and some of this ridiculous stuff that a lot of people associate with, sort of middle class, white women going along with. And Allie Beth stands out because she doesn't do that. You have this growing lineup of people. We're going to announce some new faces this summer. And I think you can kind of look at what Blaze is now at its best when you look at the summit, where last year, where Tucker Carlson did this event, which he had Fox promised him he could do. And we were really the only major conservative network to then cover this event, where he was interviewing presidential candidates. And you had people like myself and Orrin McIntyre and others giving commentary. And I think, it's we're not fully executing that vision yet. Like we can see the shift moving, but I think everyone who saw our coverage of the summit thought the same thing, which was, oh my gosh, they could really do this, right? They're showing the way to something that's different than the Daily Wire, that's different than Fox News, that thinks like I think about what's going on and provides the sort of commentary we need. And that's the direction we continue to go.
So I want to put this in the context of what's going on in the media. So today, I believe it was Jim Vandehey. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, but he was the co-founder of Politico and Axios. So he is, a legendary new media entrepreneur himself, said this is the most difficult media environment ever. And, he's talking about, for example, the fact that there's been no Trump bump for the mainstream media this year. Trump essentially bailed a declining media industry out in 2016, 2020. Now we're coming into 2024. Traffic is down everywhere. And there are a lot of other factors going on. What's happening in the broader media landscape?
Well, I think his analysis overall is correct on its face, right? Every single company that I'm aware of, every single person I've talked to, it's sort of the chickens are coming home to roost. This was happening for a long time. You're right. Companies like CNN, for instance, staved off disaster through their Trump coverage. And the CEO basically said that famously, I think in 2016 at a meeting of the board, saying, he's good for business, referring to Trump, which pissed off a lot of liberals, right? Because they didn't like to hear that. So very much so. Like a friend of mine, who I know, who's in this business, he has some line. It's something like, I'm paraphrasing. I've adopted it myself, which is that every 4 years the Constitution mandates an increase in clicks and subscriptions, and that certainly used to be the way. And I think what we're seeing is not terrible. It's not a bloodbath for us, but certainly it's not the same as in the past. And there's a number of reasons for that. Of course, if you're on the right, they've already demonetized all these companies. So for instance, if Blaze News was actually in a free market where Facebook, Google, right, no, they weren't conspiring against us in very clear ways. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's just true. Just facts. If they weren't doing that, we would be making at least tens of millions of dollars more a year, if not more. And this is stuff you can see on a chart. You can see in a chart where we're being constrained with certain articles, and others that aren't political get through the barrier on Facebook and go viral because they're allowed to do that. So that's something that the right is already aware of. But that's number one for us. But number two is this backdrop where a couple things are happening. In the past, when media was going wrong, you would talk about how the old cable, the old newspapers were falling apart. And I think what we see now is that the initial models that people use to be successful in a digital space aren't working. And you're also in a time of transition where really that trust in media going way beneath 50%, right, is down there. So to me, there's an opportunity here to be cut for new brands to stand up that people actually want to read. So there's an ideological problem, right? There's a business model problem when it comes to subscription or clicks and advertising, which way do you go? And then in the background of it all is the old media is still dying.
Yeah. One of the things, you mentioned a couple things. One, maybe I'll list these three trends. I'd love to get your reaction to them. One is that quite apart from the discrimination against conservative sites, which is real, the social media companies have decided they don't want to basically send people to media companies anymore. Even a guy who's viewed as pro free speech like Elon Musk, Twitter deeply penalizes anybody who puts a link in a tweet. And so people are talking about how social media feeds, which is what used to be a big source of distribution for these companies, has now dried up. Another one is, he argues that there's subscription fatigue and that, we're reaching sort of the point of diminishing marginal returns on getting more people to pay to subscribe. And then also that young people, Gen Z, simply don't want to read articles. I mean, they want to consume basically clips, TikTok style clips, short clips. And so the entire model of how they consume is changing. How do you see these in terms of what's driving the overall media trends and then conservative media, how it affects conservative media? It seems like some of it affects the liberal media more because they were feasting off of this stuff because they had been allowed through the whole time. And now when the just tap gets turned off for everybody, it hurts them a lot more than it hurts, conservatives.
Yeah, so let's go to the first one first. I mean, I think that's the biggest one that actually is very real and affects everyone. I mean, you have a situation in which Facebook basically hosed up the entire news industry, right? Became one of the primary vehicles by which people consume news content. And it did that by taking everyone's content, right? Which is monetizing other people's content, basically, and taking all the news. And now all of a sudden they're saying, actually, we're going to get out of the news industry. We don't want it anymore. So there's a sense in which, in a very destructive way, that's good in terms of hurting the old media or more liberal left-leaning media, the dominant media, because it's really, it's just screwing them. But that also screws right-leaning media as well, right? So Facebook is still hugely important for clicks and getting your people's attention. And they basically did. They just took everyone's stuff, they monetized it, right? It became the place you went to find news, and the place as a news organization you wanted to get your stuff out to. And now they're saying, no, we don't really want to do this anymore. It's too controversial. Screw this. And so that's an enormous problem, especially when on Google, if you're, if you're Blaze Media, we are absolutely, just screwed around with by Google. I mean, Google is completely evil, and what they've done to us is unbelievable, just even in terms of search, right? Never mind if we try to use their advertising. So that's a big problem for everybody, and that's probably the biggest structural problem is how are you going to get to the people? And that there's no easy answer to that. But I do think that's sort of that's more of a normal problem too. It's big, it affects everybody, but it's also this industry's always been crazy. It's always changing. Digital technology is still evolving. It's not settled how this works. Deal with it. And I think you really have to be multimedia, right? If you're going to be larger, you can't just have a printed page unless you're really boutique in some very attractive way. You really have to have all kinds of media on the site. That's number one. That's one way to get around it. And I think there'll be unlooked for openings as some of the social media companies change course. But that's longer term solutions for the big problem of how you get to the people and distribution. And when it comes to social media is really long term or more than this year, because this year I suspect they're going to crack down even more than they have in the past, right? Because of the election. For people like us anyway. So we'll see. Number two is subscription fatigue. Is that right?
Yeah, that was one of his points.
Yeah, I think that's very clearly true. I mean, the economy is terrible despite what they tell you. We all know, when you have multiple services that are going to go find your subscriptions for you because you're signed up to too many, people have subscription fatigue. I think that though there's some hope if you're right-leaning, where I think a lot of people are seeing if I'm going to get rid of something, I'm going to get rid of Disney. I'm done with them, and I'll give someone else a shot. But even when they give you a shot, they are then they're watching, and they're not just going to give you the dollar. You can sign up for the Blaze, go to blazemedia.com or theblaze.com for $1 and try it out. But they're gonna watch that, right?
Mm-hmm.
For good reason. And so I think subscription has to be a large part of this, but that means building a brand that people want to subscribe to, are proud to subscribe to, and see it as mission orientated. And mission, a mission right now on the right for most of the audience, they're smart. They've been through a lot, and it's not just going to be like, oh, you're on my side, so I give you money. They want to really see that you're having an impact and you're doing the kind of things that they want if you subscribe. So, the bar is higher for a subscription, I guess is what I'd say. I'm okay with that. I welcome that. That's what I'm here to build, is something that, all of your audience wants to subscribe to and increasingly gets more and more value from as we move forward. And look, Daily Wire is a competitor in many ways, but I have to say, like, this is probably their biggest success, is getting people to buy into the promise of, hey, we're at least trying to do something interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you probably want to see Matt Walsh and support this documentary, but the mission, we're doing some interesting things, come along with us. And people are like, okay, I know we need this,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm willing to support anyone who's going to do something decent in media. Right.
Right.
And that's their strong suit. And then the last one, TikTok, people not reading. Yeah. I mean, part of this is a change in habits. Part of it is a really deeper change and probably epistemological change in sort of how we come to know as a people. I think we're functionally illiterate as a society at this point. We're moving in that direction. And look, there's worse things. I mean, we're just not the same kind of read first society, and the repercussions of this are going to be enormous. They're not all bad, I would say, but the initial results from this generation that's just been raised without any filters on screens is going to be awful. The research on this it'll make like smoking cigarettes seem safe. You're going to have people who kind of turn the corner at 25 and they won't have higher like executive brain function for the rest of their lives because of the way in which they've been formed by being on screens. And I say this as a parent who has the same problems everyone else does.
Right.
You shouldn't, probably if you're listening, you probably try, and this isn't going to happen to your kids. But I'm telling you, people who have had no restraints and are just completely on the feed, the results are worse than you could possibly imagine. And they come out from all walks of life, all different scientists and so forth. It's not going to be good. So what does that mean? Well, that does mean that, yeah, we're getting dumber in a way, and we're not going to consume content in mass in the same way as we did. But there's a bright side to that as well, which is that some content can become smarter. And then other content should lean into its entertaining value. And I can give examples of that if you want, but I just went on for quite a while.
No, that's great. I mean, those forces are really changing the landscape. I agree with you on the unfiltered feed. It's really something that I think even gets a lot of mainstream attention now. I think people realize, like, wow, this is just not healthy. Whether you're a liberal or a conservative on that point. It does seem like the challenges facing media have led to a lot of internal dissension within mainstream newsrooms. So, the management's making cuts, or they're trying to make changes to adapt, and the journalists, they don't seem to want to adapt, and they're often going a little crazy. I mean, there seems to be like open internal rebellion at the Washington Post, which is in a state of collapse in terms of readership and subscriptions, despite Jeff Bezos' ownership. What do you make of something like the chaos inside the Washington Post?
Yeah, well, first, I'm glad you mentioned that it's in a state of collapse, because what people need to realize is, and conservatives sometimes get to, these institutions are so powerful, and they are, but they're also all failing. I mean, Trump's not wrong. You have the biggest brands in the world in this space, and they're not making money. I mean, the Washington Post is basically a nonprofit, right? And you better have one of the richest people in the world buying you, because otherwise, if you have to turn a profit, you have to change practices. And that's kind of what the memo that was just delivered by everyone, right? The speech that was just given over there at the Washington Post was, no, you can't keep doing this because this isn't working, right? People don't like it. It's not profitable. And what you see is a perfect storm. And here, I have a lot of hope. This is creative destruction. This is good disruption, good trouble, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
And what you have is exactly the situation you described. You have many journalists who are not going to change. They are mission driven. They are in this for one reason and one reason only, and that is to push the ideology that they so firmly believe, that's radical and that does not allow for anything like what older people, dare I say, regard as objective journalism, right? The whole point of their job and what they do is to push a narrative. And even if some of them are just more Machiavellian, they're just self-interested, their whole lives they've moved ahead by pushing this narrative. Right. So they're kind of shocked if all of a sudden, like, wait a minute, this is not how I get ahead. If I do woke stuff, I won't get ahead. No, you got to be kidding me. I'm not going to do that. This is how I move ahead. Right. So even if they're not true believers, they've been incentivized their entire lives to move in this way. And that's what they do. And so they're not going to change. It's very similar to what's going on the campuses. You can have administrators or governors that come in and say, hey, we need to get rid of this crazy stuff. And we need to get rid of it all. But you just have an entire faculty of people who this is all they do. This is what they do. It's who they are. And so they're not going to let it go easily. Now, the good news is that the Washington Post, it's a little more dangerous because you do have to have a billionaire. And when they get bored, you're screwed and you disappear.
Right. Yeah. Now, what about the conservative media landscape? I sort of look at it and see three basic buckets. Legacy media on the one hand, which would be like National Review, Fox News, and then what I call dissident media, which I think divide into two wings. One is I call the Never Trump wing, which would be like the Bulwark and the Dispatch, and then maybe the more new right wing, which I would think like the Blaze and the Daily Wire would fall into that. How do you think about this constellation of conservative media sites?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is probably pretty similar to what you're thinking. For me, the first thing is, how did you deal with Trump? Because regardless of how well the business works or management is, if you don't understand Trump, if you don't understand why that happened, which was essentially a rejection of the Republican Party as it was, then you don't know what time it is, right? And that's a problem in media, because then you don't understand where the base is. Because I think the voters have long since moved past the Republican Party. Right. The energy anyway in the base or in the mass of voters, everyone's habituated to vote Republican if they're right leaning, but they've moved beyond and they're ahead of their leaders. And Trump was a sign of that. And so if there's an inability to understand that or to think that things are going to go back to normal at some point, like they were in the days of Mitt Romney or Paul Ryan or something like this, then then that is legacy in the bad sense. So you see these organizations struggling, like National Review, to be totally fair, right, is a mixed bag. It doesn't just have like one set of people. They have some different viewpoints there. And they have great, like their name recognition is still enormous. And their numbers are still, far higher than a lot of people might think who are on the new right. Same with the Bulwark, by the way. And, and the other one.
Yeah.
The Dispatch. These places, we'll see how long they last, but they do have, a real following. But they don't capture the sort of energy or movement of the majority of people in the audience on the right. And so I kind of categorize it that way, like who is most in tune politically with the audience. Now, I think there's another way we should be evaluating this, which is sort of the quality and the range of content. But since most conservative media, unfortunately, is just a bunch of people commenting on politics, usually commenting on articles or what someone else said, right? That's all it is. And so they're influencer networks, right, of people commenting on the news. Since that's the case, then you have to kind of evaluate them on, do they understand what's going on in a broader way? And I think that is what gives them their relevance or lack of it.
Yeah, it seems to me like at least the legacy media and conservatism see the rap on them is that they skew so old. Like the median, reader at the National Review is well over 65. The Fox News viewers is aging. And what happens when the boomers aren't watching TV anymore or aren't getting the print edition of National Review like they've been doing for the last 35 years anymore?
Yeah, I mean, Aaron, it's troubling. Like, have you watched Fox recently?
No, I don't watch TV. I don't have TV.
Good. Yeah. Well, you're a sane person. You're a better person than I am. I'm forced to watch it for my job, I guess, every so often. But even then, I don't like watching cable news very much. But I was watching Fox the other night, and it makes me feel old when I watch the commercials. When you watch the commercials, it's almost embarrassing. It's like, am I in a home? Am I? Like, I mean, really, you're advertising that? I'm under 80. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's that kind of geriatric feel to it. On the other hand, I do think the principle of cable, that is going to the future of media, I don't think you can completely cut the idea of streaming, right? Streaming on digital is basically what cable is, right? Cable is always streaming.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that you just go to boxes and then click what you want to watch, I don't think you can ever replace the idea of something that's streaming and that the presumption is live. So I actually think you see this with the streamers on online. I actually do think there'll be something like those networks in a way, more prominently, but digitally based. You'll see more of that. I don't think you'll completely get rid of like the idea of a live stream that's kind of highly produced and curated. You might see more of that, not less digitally. But clearly, like these older legacy organizations and cable, right? These are out of date. Yes, they're not. Things aren't moving in their direction. So you see them, trying to cling on in various ways, and I don't think that's going to work. This has been one long retreat for a long time that so many people have been in denial about, and this is all over media. Like, you can talk about Hollywood and what the studios and what the big dogs have tried to do. Everyone has been sort of drawn to the tractor beam reluctantly into this digital space without really re-envisioning what media should be. So that's gonna keep on going on, and every day that goes by, those brands get weaker. And look, I mean, the one thing that you can say about whether people like Tucker Carlson or not is what he did at Fox was remarkable, because his show had the most energy and the most viewers, in part because he was taking the energy of digital and the thought and the cutting edge discussion that was going on Twitter, basically, and infusing that into his show with the right guests and people, right? And the right choices of topic. So what made that show so fresh and so interesting is that if you were following what the dialogue on Twitter, which, face it, most people who are decent people don't have time to do, like weirdos who are paid to look into this terrible void like I am. Most people don't have time for it, but when they see it, they're like, that's very interesting. That was really interesting. And so someone like a Chris Rufo, right, basically becomes who he is because of being able to write Twitter threads that cut into an issue in the right way. But it wasn't just that packaging. It was the fact that then you had other shows like Tucker that could bring him on and sort of mainstream him. Right? And that is exceedingly important right now, that you take that energy, but you bring it to a larger audience. So I think the principle of Tucker's show is still valid and will work. And you're just, and so in the digital space, what you need is actually a little bit more of cable. You need something that's official, right? What the digital space lacks is sort of what the legacy had, which is a place where you're like, oh, I just want to get on that show because it validates me. That's actually really important. And that's what Tucker had. Like, you got on Tucker's show. Okay, well, I was on Tucker's show, so I can't be that bad, right? Or I'm worth listening to, right? That's what media does, and mainstream quote unquote media does. So what digital actually lacks is that, and that is the direction that Blaze Media is headed. And I will say one thing, like, we are going to announce soon a news show. Probably no one's talked about it yet at all publicly, that we are going to move into doing the news for the internet.
Yeah, I was going to ask, that's the exact question I wanted to ask. what is the Blaze strategy for this new era, to the extent that you can publicly talk about it?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of work done behind the scenes that you can't quite see yet, but you can see, some nation efforts at this on the site at blazemedia.com. If you look at sub brands like Align, which is lifestyle and entertainment, or Return, which is tech, you can see sort of poking its head out this new thing where we're not just talking about politics. We're talking about lifestyle. We're talking about entertainment. We're talking about technology. We're going to be talking about faith a lot more in very interesting ways. So I think that this is the way of the future. First off, is not any grand, secret strategy, but simply doing something that no one else is doing, which is just don't talk about politics all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is political, right?
Right.
It's not about getting outside of politics. It's all within politics. I'm an Aristotelian on this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything is contained within our political community, but it's about talking about how to live our lives in important ways that we all increasingly care about. And I think that's the sort of content that's the future as we move forward. And this is something that you've been doing in your own life, in your own products for a long time. And we need to talk about how we live our lives. So that is, to me, strategy number one. I think regardless of what happens in this very volatile year, as volatility increases, more and more people are going to rethink, how should I live? What kind of community should I be part of? How do I join the local community? What am I trying to do there? And just starting to rethink things as they're jarred into that by realizing something is really wrong with everything else that's going on in the society. And so I want to be there. In other words, whether Trump wins and they pull down a complete color revolution on the country and freak out and things get crazy, or whether Trump loses and half the right is thinking, what are we going to do? How then should we live? I want Blaze Media to be there with a welcome pamphlet saying, here's a welcome pamphlet to the rest of your life.
Yeah.
It's not over. You can still live well. We have to figure out how to do that in the midst of this society that's so opposed to our values, right? And I think like the shift to that kind of content for me is so important. Not that, of course, the political coverage isn't the bread and butter still and very important in commentary on politics. But I think moving into how do I live my life? What products and services do I buy? What interesting efforts are there out there? And that is the right environment also to have fun, right? If I want entertainment or I want something to be edified with in terms of leisure, I also want that sort of thinking, just what's good and bad and what should I do? And what would be a good story to tell, right? I want to move into that space increasingly as time goes on. And then the other general thing I'll say, and we can get into more technical like media stuff too, but is that I think the right lacks a kind of like aspirational love of beauty and just thinking and writing about things well, where we don't really have that same kind of prestige system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know
like writing high quality like magazine features.
Yes.
Things.
Yes. Like just a really interesting high quality profile.
Like a Walter Kern type article.
Yes. Yes. That stuff has been lacking for a long time. And I think the time is right to start to move in a different direction. We're going to have a quarterly coming out that I think is going to be very interesting to you. And we should have you write for issue 2. That quarterly is going to be a really interesting thing for our top subscribers. That will be beautiful. We'll incorporate some of what we did formerly at a publication called Return, which only had 2 issues come out. But this will really be something that doesn't talk about politics directly. Some of the big names who are political commentators, one of whom works for Blaze, is talking about how he likes MMA and why, and people who work with their hands. There's something in there about Glenn Beck that people don't realize, which is that he's not just randomly collecting a bunch of historical artifacts. He's literally trying to bring people together to preserve America's story in a serious way, because people are out there like trying to melt down the bell of the Santa Maria right now. Like they're buying historical artifacts to ruin them. And a lot of the museums are, getting rid of or destroying or hiding America's story. So that there's stuff like that. But then there's also an article about the guys in El Segundo who a bunch of young tech bros who are, most of them are Christian or Christian-ish, which is interesting. And they're out there, lifting weights and trying to save the world with some very interesting tech companies. And this is all to me of a piece, right? There is a commercial cultural movement. This is what I've been about for the last 4+ years that is moving in a different direction. And that needs to be fostered and covered in all kinds of ways. But part of that needs to focus on doing it well with real good profile. We have a profile of Chris Rufo that will be in there as well. That's asking him about things he's not normally asked, right? Mm-hmm. Which is what I think a normal, well done profile would do. It wouldn't just be like, oh, Chris Rufo, how do you fight the libs? It'd be like, mm-hmm. Who are you? Mm-hmm. Why do you dress the way you do? Right. And the way I put this is, if you're wondering in the audience, because I used to be much more like maybe 10 years ago, I would have heard myself talk now and go, what are you talking about? We gotta fight these people. The way I put it is, like Candace Owens, I think Candace Owens is very interesting, controversial, always very interesting. She was a legit star, but I kind of feel like I usually know what she's going to say politically.
Yeah.
And as a 46-year-old man who's not like buying supermarket profile lifestyle magazines, I would be way more interested and probably watch a show that was her and her husband talking about how they're going to try to raise their children and how they live, than I would be listening to her talk about politics. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. The realities of like behind the scenes and people trying to figure out how you live in 21st century America, which isn't just a challenge for, political, cultural conservatives, but for everybody in a world where the housing prices are high, the middle class has been disappearing. There are a lot of trends in the public schools people don't like who aren't Christian. And people are trying to figure out, what do I tell my kids about how to live their lives? What kind of community should I be living in light of these things? It's a hot topic for people.
No, and I think that you're seeing a new coalition come together. And the problem with the censorship in the media is that it's there to prevent realignment. I mean, that's why the reason that powerful forces, right, are censoring people is they don't want the sort of realignment that's possible. And the realignment that's possible is very, very interesting. It means that, the food stuff is one of the best examples, right? You all of a sudden realize, well, there's all kinds of people who share way more in common, trying to stay away from seed oils right. and make their bodies healthy and not trusting the USDA, and who think it's ridiculous that you can't buy eggs from your neighbor, right? And there's all these regulations about meat. That's a coalition that's hippie-ish, right? That's some new agey people in there, but everyone's looking at it from the same principle, and that's a new coalition of people. It's a very serious issue, much more serious than people think. It relates to really how you live what you put in your body, right? Relates to how you live your life. And that's the kind of thing that they don't really want. I mean, because what end up happening if we're successful at all and just showing people what's already going on. This is a commercial cultural movement that doesn't have a name because no one's covering it this way. No one's fostering it and looking at it with this editorial direction in a cohesive way. But it's there. If people saw that, they'd all of a sudden go, well, I want to live this way with these people rather than over here. And the way I put it is like, who wants to live in the same? Who do you want to live in the same neighborhood with, realistically? Right. And that means like just looking around America, like who would you be okay with living in the same neighborhood with? Mm-hmm. And so you look around all the people. You can't just choose, whatever people who are too similar to you. You got to kind of from the grab bag. Like who do you want to be? And you look at that, and all of a sudden you realize it's a pretty broad coalition of people, right? Who are sort of on team sanity. And I'd be like, yeah, I'd rather be over here with them than these people over here. And that what unites that coalition is really a kind of way of life stuff.
Yep. I think people have pointed out that some of the products that are sold on that, what is it, the Goop brand, and the stuff that were in the InfoWars store basically were the same formulations. Or the way that a guy like Robert Kennedy Jr. Has been captivated many different kinds of audiences I do think there are interesting axes of, I don't know if alignments is the right word, but
Yeah.
people who share similar concerns, even if nominally their political, cultural outlooks are quite different, and even light on some of the exact same solutions, which is very interesting. When it comes to the Blaze, maybe this will be my last question. Maybe it's 6 years from now.
Hmm.
Maybe that's the wrong time frame. 6, 8 years from now, we're in a post-Trump world. We're in a sort of post-boomer world. Some of these trends have played out a little bit. Where do you see kind of the media and conservative media world being that time frame out in the future?
Well, the caveat has to be if conservative media is allowed to be at all, right? First, but what I like to say is, if it is allowed to be at all, the place that will be the longest to last, and even in a completely totalitarian regime, it's very hard to keep down, is a kind of lifestyle cultural place where stories have meanings and everyone knows what they mean, right? Symbols have meaning. What you wear has meaning, and sometimes it's almost hidden or indirect, even if you live in the Soviet Union, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think this also the longest area to last is where I want to go. So I think that the situation is ripe for us to. It's just hard work to do well, and it takes a while to build the right foundation. But if we do our job, we become the dominant news organization because we're positioned to move in that direction in the country for the right. And that might sound crazy now, but I think the potential is absolutely there. There's a organization whose name rhymes with Fox that has lost a lot of trust and is, I think, on its last legs. It will survive because of this election period, but this is not. It's lost the soul of the thing, and I don't think you can put the pieces back together again. And then you have Daily Wire, which I don't even think is trying to be that entity.
Mm-hmm.
And you have us in terms of size. OANN and Newsmax, I think, are facing some serious challenges. So I see us as news for the internet in a digital world. If we're inventive enough, that being number one on the right-leaning, let's call it, space is totally up for grabs. And then I think beyond that, as I was saying, being the place where let me put the problem. Here's the problem I'm trying to solve for, right, in the next
Mm-hmm.
6 years is this. Not a single one of any of the names I mentioned, including our own company, have been able to make lots of different stuff at scale.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, if we're talking like LA, where I'm going again this weekend, well, actually, I'm going to Orange County, thankfully, this weekend, not LA, where I spent a significant amount of time. The ecosystem is big enough there where you are constantly in one of these larger companies cutting deals with countless production companies and studios of all different kinds, and you're just getting all kinds of deals done and content out there, right? The most charitable explanation is, on the conservative side of things, the ecosystem isn't big enough to do that. What I mean by this is, imagine a world in which one of these organizations, Blaze Media, six years from now, is either working as a studio, like making all kinds of stuff with all kinds of people and pumping it out there to sell, or bringing in all kinds of projects, from reality TV shows that you've never envisioned to sitcoms, and just putting it out there and able to make money off of it.
Mm-hmm.
No one's done that yet. I mean, Daily Wire has done more than sell the dream. Like, they've actually taken real shots at this, and they deserve credit for just trying to do that, right? But we don't really have that yet, and that's a really difficult thing to build. I mean, it's not a joke. You need a lot of talented people, and you need a kind of again, an ecosystem that's big enough where you're constantly buying and selling. So now the temptation would be, well, we just make our own stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, say, Lady Ballers, and we just put our own people in that, and we make our own stuff. I mean, then Lady Ballers is a comedy that Daily Wire put out. Or you say, we're gonna make stuff, but maybe we'll pay other people to do it, but it's ours exclusively, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're gonna build up our own sort of Netflix. But that's really hard to do at scale, right? I mean, and no one's going to pretend they have even anywhere close the content, right? For even a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of a Netflix. So I want to see Blaze in 6 years in that space where we're working with a lot of different people. We're pumping out a ton of content and a ton of interesting stuff that's blowing people's minds. That's inventive. That's stuff that they really haven't even dreamed of. As well as providing that news.
Well, good luck getting there. I mean, those are some huge gaps you've talked about, and I appreciate you being so candid about where you see the gaps are in the market, because it's always a temptation to just say everything's great, all is well, right? When the fireworks and stuff are going on behind. Again, Matthew Peterson is the editor-in-chief of The Blaze. You can check it out at theblaze.com. They've got a bunch of content on YouTube and elsewhere. There's a link in the show notes. Matt, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Aaron. Always a pleasure.